Hiya and welcome to this week's episode of Inside Property Development, where I'm speaking with Phill Williams and James Evans from 4 Green and 1 Red Property Group. They are experienced SME developers, and we're talking about the many problems and difficulties we have to deal with, and hopefully a few solutions as well. It's an interesting one. I will see you on the inside, as they say. And importantly, please do like and subscribe. I want to get this message to as many people as possible. So do like and subscribe. Give us some comments. Let us know what you think. And importantly, share it with your friends as well. I hope you like it. Right, just a quick one. Whether you are a massively experienced and well-established property developer already, or maybe you're a new or aspiring one, either way, you will know that it is really not easy to find viable opportunities to come up with the best scheme, the best design that's going to maximise the land value and fully de-risk things for you, and then to go on to get the very best planning permissions as quickly as possible. But however experienced you are, you will know that that is not an easy thing. I have put together a super detailed scorecard based on my 40 years experience in this industry, reverse engineering everything that I've learned, including lots and lots of mistakes over the years, and everything I've done to maintain, touch wood, 100% planning track record. I'm pretty sure there will be stuff that you don't know. Go and do that scorecard. Find out just how good or not your current process is, and I absolutely guarantee you will learn at least a little something, if not a ton. So it's bit.ly /MLA score, all in capitals. You can do the Millbank Land Academy scorecard. I absolutely guarantee you will find some interesting stuff, and it will help you get much better deals. Phill, James, thanks for coming.
Thanks for inviting us on the show, Paul.
So, before we start, just for the audience, can you just give us a little intro about where you come from, what you're up to?
Yeah, so I'm the CEO of a company called 4 Green 1 Red. It's a property development company. I've been in the residential development space for 35 years, pretty much like yourself. I come from an architectural background, trained as an architect technician. Came to the 1991 recession, got made redundant on a YTS scheme. Had 2 options really. One was university, and the other one was to try and find another job. So spent the next 7 years in studying architecture, and then sort of came out, did a bit of contract work for architectural practices, and realised that the sort of the people who actually control and make the money in this industry are the developers. So just shifted over into property development, started off, small scale flips, BRRs, moved up to one-off houses for myself, a couple of barn conversions, and then much bigger schemes, 10, 20, 30 units really.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, similar-ish to me in some ways, like starting small and building up to bigger stuff, which 100%. I think is sensible really. But you, James?
So I've spent 16 years in the industry, worked my way up through the sort of corporate ladder with various corporate entities. Me and Phill met at Berkeley Homes.
At Berkeley, yeah?
At Berkeley, yeah.
That's who you used to work for, yeah?
It was. How long were we there? 5 years?
Yeah, about that, yeah. So in different disciplines, I was on the design side, design and technical side. James was obviously on the commercial side.
I sort of worked my way up through that way, working on various sort of mixed-use schemes or high-rise throughout the home counties. And prior to that, my background was more the high-end residential one-off builds in sort of the Surrey, Esher, Cobham, those sort of places. And that was really nice.
Octagon country.
Yeah, all of that stuff. Yeah.
Very good.
A lot of that in the high-end things. I mean, to be honest, they're the same houses, just not bigger.
Yeah, nice. Well, you say that, it's interesting. On some of these, we end up having some interesting debates about house builders, and there are definitely people out there that, slag off the major house builders. And there are some shit ones, obviously, but there are good ones as well. And, Berkeley are probably, in terms of the mainstream major house builders, they're probably number one, I'd say.
I think I'd probably tend to agree with you. I think what they do really well, and we've all said this, is that they're a sales and marketing company.
Yeah.
That just happen to have a product that is house building, but what they offer in the market is phenomenal. Customer service, marketing, sales and marketing experience and customer service that those guys provide is second to none. I don't see anybody else doing that.
Yeah.
I think they have a slightly different business model, as you just alluded to. They're, instead of a traditional, big corporate, a Barrett, Redrow, they're almost reverse engineered to be the sales top down. And it filters through, doesn't it, in everything they do. And they're all about the customer throughout the whole process from top to bottom. And I think it shows in the product. They're not perfect, but...
I like them, and it's interesting. So, obviously, I used to know Tony Pidgley. Obviously, he was a fantastic deal doer and land buyer, and it is also all about land and deals as well, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. We've all heard the stories about Tony, taking deals off his son. Don't know how much truth is in that or not, but, from the background he came from to where he ended up, before he unfortunately passed away, he was, what an inspiration in the industry of what can be achieved.
So what are you up to now?
So we've got a couple of schemes on the go at the moment, a couple going through planning permission. One of the biggest projects we've got at the moment is a mixture of everything. So we do new build development, we do commercial conversions to residential, and we've literally just bought an 18-acre small holding between Ross and Wye and Gloucester, which has got a bit of everything in it, really. It's got a renovation of an 18th century farmhouse.
Wow. Listed, obviously.
No, it's not actually.
Not listed.
No, surprisingly not. It's not listed. So there's a renovation with that. Then there's a barn which we're looking to either take through Part Q or Part R under PD, convert that into 5 units. There's an orchard. There's an 18-acre potential glamping site, and a number of outbuildings that need to be converted and renovated into SA. And what we're probably going to do is hold this as an income, as an investment rather than sell it, which we normally do.
So obviously, SME developers basically same as me really, and it's not easy, is it?
It's certainly not. I think we're at a crucial time, as you've discussed sort of with your various guests. There's a number of issues that are rising to the surface, a number of blockers that need to be solved to unlock the key. Yeah. And if we're going to get anywhere near the
so let's go through them then.
So the biggest one from your background, Paul, is land and planning. The planning system is 100% broken, as we know. They're under resourced, most local authorities. What we find is that in between different local authorities, you've got the MPPF, right, which people are meant to adhere to. There's so many nuances and differences between different local authorities. There's no certainty really as a developer of when you submit that planning application, which can cost tens of thousands of pounds, even for a relatively small scheme.
Yep.
Probably talking about 50k for a 10-unit scheme, and the amount of reports required, from biodiversity net gain, ecology, transport statements, you name it. It's a big piece of work that needs to be done, and that sort of like I think there must be a way that we can release small schemes to fast track through a planning system. There's got to be a process that we as developers and the wider audience can find a route through to release small schemes that just quicker through the planning system.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So I don't usually try to date these podcasts because usually they take a while to edit and what have you. So there's often a little bit of a lag before they actually go out. So this may well be 2 or 3 weeks in advance of when we've actually recorded it. But just this week, which is, where are we, the last week in May, there have interestingly been, as you will know, some biggish announcements about SME house builders and trying to solve things a bit. Now, I've got to say, fair play to the Labour government, to some extent, because they are trying to do stuff and it is happening fairly quick. Now, obviously, there's a lot more that needs to be done. So I'm sure there's some of the things you might talk about that are actually being now looked at as of this week. But now, whether they're looked at the right way or in enough detail, we'll see. But so what have you got? What specifically in terms of problems we need SMEs need to deal with?
Alluding back to what Phill was just saying, the funding segues nicely from the planning. All the costs involved with all the consultants rather, all the team you have to have now doesn't differ too much from the big boys. You've named a few, but it's a very similar cost point, whether it's 10 units or 100 units.
100%.
So the cash flow for SMEs is obviously a lot more tight than it is for the big boys.
Yeah.
So I see that as one of the key, from a commercial background, I see that as one of the key issues that needs to be unlocked. But you've also got access to finance is more difficult to come by, we find. Everyone goes on about there's plenty of money out there, which there is. But it's what the banks and the other sort of entities are willing to lend on. And it's dictated by market conditions with all this stuff going on with Trump and all that good stuff. It all feeds in to a very difficult climate at the moment.
I think the other thing as well is that, talking about the finance side of things, is that it's almost a catch-22 situation whereby, the specialist development lenders, let's not talk, we can talk about the high street banks because obviously they just don't want to lend to SME developers at all. But the specialist lenders, even, to get something through planning, as we reiterate what I just said, is that it could be a £50,000 application.
Yeah.
So they won't lend on development finance without planning permission, but then you need the funding to get the planning permission, which is always at risk, even though you can mitigate as much as possible, and you can do things in line with the development plan, but until you've got that decision notice in your hand, it's still a huge risk that you go through,
It is, and do you know what? It's really an interesting point actually. Well, I never plan on talking about anything really. I just go with the flow and see where it goes. But at some point, I've been thinking a lot based on some of the recent news and stuff about land trading, because there's been a few comments and stuff in the press around that, and particularly on LinkedIn and things like that. And personally, probably trade more than I build. And going forward, I'm probably going to do that even more, because building is a ball ache. I'm not getting any younger, so I'm going to do less of it. But I will probably, I'm good at planning. I'll carry on tying up sites, getting planning permission, adding planning value, and selling them on. And I know there will be people out there, I've heard it before, saying like that's a bad thing. But the fact of the matter is, someone has got to de-risk and create the opportunities for other smaller developers to buy. Because, in the olden days, being a really good builder was enough. You could find and buy some land and get planning relatively easily, build some houses, sell them, do it again. Now, well, actually, since 1988, which was the peak of SME house builders and developers in the country, being a good builder is nowhere near enough. You need to be an absolute planning and design expert as well, and have a fair few quid in order to speculate on planning applications. So, if planning was easy and simple, well, you wouldn't need promoters or traders or whatever, but it's not, and it's not going to be any time soon. So actually, there is a real serious need for people that know how to get planning permission and de-risk things so that people can actually build them.
I think that links nicely back in with the certainty element. I absolutely concur with you that you can control a large majority with the planning thing, all the stuff up front, but with the build, there's a lot of unknowns there. You can quantify as much as you can try, but and it all links in with the finances. You need finances to work, as you've alluded to many times on this podcast. If the finances don't work, we don't get out of bed, nothing gets built. And I think what it's doing, it's creating a market where there's more unregulated lenders, and that can create its own issues. People that are coming into this space not knowing 100% of exactly what they're doing. And you touched on it, you need a specialist team now. It never used to be that way. You really need to be a specialist in all elements to make a successful deal. Whereas, like you just said, if you're a builder, a good builder, you can make things work and probably make quite good money. But I think it's much more difficult now. And we know a few people that have come unstuck, don't we? With unregulated lenders, they've taken a chance, they don't know the space. Yeah. And they've come unstuck.
Absolutely. I mean, property development is potentially high reward because it is very high risk, and it is complicated, and it's getting more complicated all the time. So it's absolutely not the sort of thing to be trifled with. And very often when it comes to, new uneducated or miseducated so-called developers, and of course, and likewise with investors or funders giving them money, it really is or can be the blind leading the blind, you know.
I think that for me is just hits the nail on the head. You know, you've got so many what I class as fake gurus in the education space, in property space, you know, peddling the dream that this is an easy industry to get into, and you know, you can be financially free after one development, which, you know, you potentially can. But what they don't do is you can also be financially bankrupt after one development.
100%.
And they'd never ever, you know, I've done numerous courses in my life. I love webinars, as James will probably take the mickey out of me on, and further in education. But the state of the education is you know, you've got some good guys, you know, yourself included in that list, Paul, who know what they do, and they've got the battle scars. They've been through the process. They understand where the problems lie. But most of the people I see is that they just peddle this dream that you can leave your job and do this really easily. It's just it's something that I'm quite passionate about and want to try and change.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, no, more so than anything in property, you know, property development is the most complex. It is the highest risk, and you do need to have been there, seen it, done it. Certainly, you know, there are other people out there talking about it and trying to teach it. I mean, how would you even know unless you've done a lot of deals, you built a lot of things, and you've been through at least a few crashes and crunches, yeah? Because when the shit does hit the fan, as it always does, you know, things are very, very different, yeah?
2008 taught me a massive lesson about how easy things can go wrong very quickly.
Me too.
You know, managed to survive through that and come out the other side of it. But again, you know, if you haven't been through that, you can't educate people on how to mitigate risk and how to manage risk. And I think that, you know, it is a highly leveraged industry, right? We're borrowing potentially 70% loan to values. You know, if that goes wrong, and it goes wrong very quickly, you know, you're losing your home. As James said earlier on, one of the people I know very well, not from a construction background or a planning background, bought an old nursing home, borrowed money from an unregulated provider, who we've later found out, mentioning no names, is that the whole business model is to withhold funding on various drawdown stages to push you into a position whereby you can no longer fund the deal and take it off you. Right? And then make the money by finishing the deal.
Absolutely.
It's
really
criminal.
interesting. So it's worth talking about that, because there is a whole dodgy lender model called loan to own. Yeah, and that's exactly what they do. And there'll be people out there that don't know that. They'll, you know, particularly, you know, less experienced people, you know, they're desperate to do a deal. They wouldn't get funded by a sensible lender, because a sensible lender would know that they haven't got the knowledge and experience, and the thing they're looking at probably isn't a sensible deal anyway. So, you know, they get into bed with the wrong people. And there are people out there, lenders, that the whole name of their game is knowing that it's going to go tits up, and they'll pull the plug on you and have the deal off you, and that's their whole model, you know.
Yeah, it's quite scary. We've seen, as Phill said, a few instances of that, and I feel that's becoming more prevalent. I don't know what you think, but it's scary that there's people out there that is their sole business model. You know, it's hard enough to do this stuff, as we've discussed, but to be fighting people like that, and once, you know, you lend from these people, it's very, very difficult to get out.
Well, I guess, look, there's obviously dodgy people and sharks in every walk of life, but, you know, it's important that people know that is the type of thing that happens. And it's interesting, actually. You know, I have a fair few architects on here, and we talk about, you know, good architects and bad architects, and the amount of not very good architects there are. And it's the same with everything. With you know, with lenders, you know, you've got to be dealing with really reputable people that are also experienced. Because I'll tell you, obviously, one of the things that's happened is, you know, in, let's just say, this last wave of development, there's been a whole load of new lenders, you know, challenger banks and the smaller, you know, outfits they're new to development, so they don't know what goes wrong when the shit hits the fan and the market takes, you know. So again, it's the blind leading the blind. You've got lenders getting involved in funding stuff that they don't really understand well enough, you know.
Look, you know, don't sound all doom and gloom, right? It's a great industry to be in. And you said it is high risk, high reward, but as long as you know what you're doing, or, you know, conversely, you've got a very, very good professional team behind you. You know, and James, you know, on we can talk about viability and, you know, the software that you guys you're involved with. We've used some slightly different software in the past, but, you know, when you're stacking a deal and you understand what goes into the stack, and it's not. You don't know what you don't know. I hate that term, but it does ring true.
It's right though, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think you've got to know your industry. You've got to know line by line item. You know, what do you build costs? What are your professional fees? You know, is there 106? Is there SIL payments, or multiple of variables that go into stacking a deal to get the residual land value that you're comfortable with? And also, I think I'm a firm believer, probably like yourself, is that you've got to have a decent profit margin in a scheme. Totally. And I've seen people who take a deal at 14-15% thinking that's a great return, and then all of a sudden something goes wrong and they're done.
Exactly, that can disappear very quickly, can't it?
I think just picking up on that train of thought, the software that you sort of behind viability, I think something like that, a platform, is fantastic, especially for SMEs, because if you don't know, if you haven't trodden the path, with 40, 50 years experience, something like that allows you to assess schemes accurately and correctly, and it could stop a lot of people getting in trouble. And I think with that, in 5-10 minutes, not 3-4 weeks.
Well, that's the thing, because I tell you, one of the reasons we created that, and this is obviously not meant to be an advert for viability, but the idea with that is, as you will know, the old-fashioned way, even if you're experienced, you have to look at a site for a long time, go away, hunt around a lot of information, tweak it, value engineer it, optimize it, research it a bit more, and only sometimes to not be able to get to the value you need to get to, and you can spend a lot of time and money if you don't know what you're doing, only to discover something's not a deal anyway. Worse still, for inexperienced people, very often they've already done the deal, and it's at a much later date they find out that it wasn't a deal and it doesn't work. We
often say, don't we, one of our mantras is it's better to walk away from a deal if it doesn't work than it is to just jump in.
Of course.
And again, we're seeing that more and more because people get itchy feet. They just want to get involved in this space. Yeah, like Phill said, you can make some good returns, as we all know, but you can just as quickly, if not probably easier, lose a lot of money in this space. And I think, obviously, I'm quite biased, being sort of commercially minded. Stacking the schemes correctly is absolutely crucial. I cannot emphasise that as much. You need everything. You need a good planning team. You need all of this good stuff. But if you get the stack wrong and you don't know you've got it wrong, you're only going to find out at the end, and you're a world of pain. Yeah. So I think, software or something similar that gives you the insight of all the things you may not have thought of, and it plugs it out for you to make your decision on, is invaluable for me, certainly.
So you've got a few notes here.
We have.
What else have we got as big problems for developers, things they need to know about, and issues to be solved?
Material costs, inflation, labour, lack of labour, lack of youngsters coming into the industry. James always says, why would you want to work on a construction site when you can become an influencer, right? There's a whole world of people, and of people leaving the industry, of getting to retirement age and before, which I'm not far away from none of these self, Paul. Yeah. But all of that skill and knowledge is going, and how you get the momentum of getting people back into wanting to do this is a difficult topic to try and unravel.
Well, I think you have several things you could unpick on that, but we won't harp on it too much. You obviously had Brexit, which a lot of the labour force is factual, went back to various parts of Europe. That hasn't been replaced. There's not many apprenticeships out there. Bringing in the next generation as such, and a lot of the workforce is ageing. We discussed this, didn't we? That bricklayers, you could name them, scaffolders, carpenters, they tend to be an ageing workforce, and there's not that sort of fresh new talent coming in behind. And does that lead itself into sort of modular construction and various other bits? Probably does, but there's certainly a gap and a void that needs to be filled.
It's a good point, but you look at the likes of, there's a number of modular guys gone out of business, yeah, where they've priced a job maybe 2 years ago with material costs, and they've gone through the roof, and now they can't deliver what they've promised to deliver. And people stopping building sites because of costs going through the roof, and again they haven't got that factory of conveyor belt that they need to make that model work. So
it's really interesting you say that. So as I've mentioned earlier, there's been quite a lot in the news recently of government announcements and stuff like that. And just this week I saw on LinkedIn, and it was about the government announcement about, we're going to fine developers for not implementing planning permissions and all the rest of it, right? So, obviously we know that you do not spend fortunes to get planning permission only to sit on the site and not implement it, right? We want to be getting on with stuff, obviously. Anyway, so I did a little response on LinkedIn and all the rest of it, and obviously lots of people are chipping in and saying what they think and all the rest of it. And there was some post from some bloke who, went and checked him out on LinkedIn. He was quite senior in the MMC construction and world, and basically going on about, he was agreeing, talking about developers sitting on land and stuff like that. And I said, look, they don't. So he was basically demonstrating that a fundamental misunderstanding of how land planning and development economics really work. He clearly, and it's actually that which is indicative of the reasons actually lots of these modular manufacturers have actually gone bust. Because if they actually understood the industry, they wouldn't have done what they've done. So for example, well, it's pipeline, isn't it? Really, it's a big part of it. You've got big factory, massive overheads. And you are never, what we're planning in this country, the way it works at the moment, going to have to be able to have a consistent enough pipeline to keep feeding the machines, basically. For one thing, the other important thing is, you don't really want tons and tons of repetition of exactly the same thing because it looks horrible. And also, that exactly the same thing, whatever that might be, top hats box number 2, for example, isn't going to work on most sites. So for all sorts of reasons, I don't think modular, absolutely, in my opinion, is not going to be the main thing that solves the housing crisis.
I get the panelised system. I think, you can do some decent stuff with that, and I think I've had a conversation with an MD of one of the large house builders and disagreed with him really, but what he said was that I have quite a big bugbear about the repetition, as you say, toy town repetition of standard house types, but with a new window here or maybe a different tile hanging there, but it's the same product multiplied across the country, and it just it doesn't resonate with me from a design background. But when you go and look at things like grand designs, and social media, and I think that the population is much more design aware than it's ever been, and all of a sudden the guy from the house builder said, well, we only build what people want, and obviously if they're selling it, they're going to build more of it. And it was a bit of a dichotomy for me. I just didn't agree with him and said, it's if you look at I think one of my favourites on grand design was by I think it was Patrick Bradley. I think it was the container houses. I don't know if you saw that one, did he?
No, I'm not sure.
I can send you a link to that. And it's like he built it on a farm out in Ireland, and it was 4 shipping containers. But the design is absolutely phenomenal, and that was his own house as a one-off. But there's nothing stopping people self-building and designing things that they actually want to live in, rather than just having, this is what you've got, this is your choice.
I think that's where the SMEs is so crucial, because, deem the term cookie cutter. I hate that term, but it, typifies what not all the big boys, but, the big developers do. And the SMEs, they've got more flexibility, that they're probably working on schemes of 50 units and under, let's say maybe 25. And it's certainly at the core of our principles, it needs to be sustainable, that goes without saying. But we're all about good design, and that might sound a broad term, but it's not just doing the same building for every development. I think you touched on it, Paul, that what will work on one scheme doesn't necessarily work on the next, and vice versa.
I'm particularly really keen on trying to, regrow the industry of SME house builders, because they do, I want to say they care more. Do you know what? I am going to say they care more. They do care more, actually, because, remember, I spent 10 years working for the big house builders. I know how that industry works. I know how that model works. It is big business. There's good ones and not so good ones, but, they're influenced massively by, the city and shareholders and feeding the machine and growth and numbers, all that sort of stuff. And they've got their model, right? But which leads or sort of pushes them a bit to a lot of them to do things in a certain way. Conversely, at the opposite end of the scale, you've got people like us SME developers. We might be building 1, 2, 10, 20, 30, and we really, I certainly, I'm sure you guys do as well, care much more about what I do. You know, I'm not just about the numbers. I love it when I drive past something that I built 10, 20 years ago and it's like, it's still looking good. And it's like, you know, it's fantastic. Yeah, we all want to make a nice few quid and we've got to pay the bills, but actually creating stuff that you can be really proud of is a good feeling, isn't it?
I agree with you, and I think it's like even goes one step further when you provide the keys to the owner, and they're so proud of it that they want to bring their mates around to show what they've got. And it's not the standard product that, you know, that people may choose to live in, but you know, it's not for everybody. But I think you're right. I think there needs to be much more variety and flexibility with the planning department, because again, right, sometimes we're geared down. It needs to fit in context. And from my experience, it's either that it has to replicate what's been built before, or you've got to go so far the other way, so you can see what's been, you know, what's historic and what's not.
Yeah.
It just needs to be a little bit more sensible thought about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the good thing is, say, even like based on this sort of government statement and thing this week about SME house builders, it's looking like, you know, they sort of saying that they seem to recognise, well, they do. You know, people have been saying for a long time we need more SME developers and house builders, but I don't actually think, this is the thing, unless you're literally at the coalface like we are trying to do it, it's really only us. You know, even architects and the planning consultants and all the other professionals that we have to work with and we like to work with, right? It's not them ultimately at the coalface, and it's not their what's on the line. So no one really understands the problems like we do, I don't think, do they?
No. Sorry, James. It's and also again, it goes back to your how you brief your consultant team. You know, we've had conversations multiple times that it's just not their actual job, right, to stack or work out the numbers or what the best housing mix is on a particular development. But you get the people who want to have trophy showcase design, right? And they don't listen to the budget. They won't listen to, you know, what you're telling them, and they go off on a tangent. And when they come back, you go, "What's that?" And then they take offence. It's you've got to have that. You know, we've over the years built a very, very good professional team, and that goes from mortgage brokers all the way through to building control advisors. You know, we could touch on the Building Safety Act, but that's probably a whole topic for another podcast. But yeah, having that professional team behind you who understand what you're trying to deliver and work with you on multiple projects, not just one, is a valuable resource to have.
Yeah, I think all these points link together. They can be linked together, can't they? Because I think another thing that we as SMEs have to do is probably try and educate. Is the best word, I suppose, the outside world and the media. I know we discussed it briefly off air, but I think it's down to people like us to portray what it is like on the front line, and that's exactly what podcasts like yourself do. And it's trying to give them the nuts and bolts to understand truly what it takes to get landowners to, you know, sell their land, SMEs to build, and to sell that. And it's all very cyclical, and it links in.
You touch upon selling stuff. I mean, at the moment, I actually think that is the biggest problem. Actually, you know, I've got stuff built that has been very slow to sell.
Slow market.
And so has pretty much everyone, you know, including, you know, the biggest developers. Slow sales rates are really slow, and you know, that really does kill you. So, and you're not gonna go, you know, it's almost like, you know, you can't go and do the next ones whilst you've still got a load of money and risk and energy tied up in your current ones, really. So 100%, the one thing that hasn't really been talked about by the government yet, that is really like the big elephant in the room, is something needs to be done to help affordability and sales.
Landowners still think their, you know, value of their land is worth X. The developers obviously need to make money to do anything, and there's still quite a gap. I think the gap is closing in sort of the last 6 to 12 months. And all the legislation, you know, the EDP that has been discussed very recently, we haven't touched on BNG, all of that good stuff, unfortunately, just makes each development more expensive, which unfortunately comes off, or majority comes off the price of the value of the land. because as we've discussed before, a developer isn't going to do this for free. You know, they need to make a bit to make it worthwhile, and I think that's something that gets unfairly criticised in the media. Is, you know, you discuss land banking. The reality is that's a complete farce, in my opinion, and for all the reasons we've discussed.
A couple of weeks ago, I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, just a little super short podcast on land economics and development appraisals and viability to explain that what we're talking about, because again, there are lots of people out there, you know, inexperienced developers, but particularly perhaps people a bit more on the planning side and all the rest of it, and even policymakers obviously don't really understand the whole planning, land value, viability thing, because I mean, ultimately that is really what it's all about. You know, we've got to find deals, we've got to persuade landowners to sell, we've got to get deals to stack up. Otherwise, nothing happens. And that, I mean, it really is as simple as that. I know, you know, people that don't understand think it's all about developers being greedy and trying to maximise profits and stuff like that. The issue, no, obviously we need to make good profits, or try to make good profits in order to cover for the, you know, what the not insignificant risk that's in the business. But it's not developers' profits that's driving things. It's, and always has been, land values.
No, I think the thing that ties back into that, though, is that when you look at pound per square foot sales values, and there's only certain parts of the probably country now where, compared to build costs, which are, you know, not quite on parity, but they're getting quite close, is where it actually makes sense to develop. And so you're isolated in a quite large part of the country, and it's like something either more government funding for SMEs or partial funding to take that, you know, or to mitigate or share risk. I think is a way forward. You
know, I've got a beta version of this new software I've been developing with one of my partners. You know, when you click on the site, well, actually not even click on the site, you go to the area, and it automatically works out average pounds per square foot or square metre, whatever you work in, sales values, and average pounds per square foot or square metre build costs. So really, as you know, you only need to see those two numbers to know, like, is it even possible that I might get something to work here? So funnily enough, actually, I was doing a little demo with someone yesterday, having this conversation, and I said, go to Merthyr Tydfil. No apology, no offence to people living in Merthyr Tydfil, but I know, you know, it's a low value part of the country in terms of end values, and it was 155 quid a square foot. Yeah. Now go to average build costs, and it was something like 170 or whatever, 160, right? So it's like, you know, in terms of new build, well, you know, you can't even afford to build it, let alone have a land value and a profit margin. And it's that type of thing that people need to be aware of. Now, interestingly, with our software, that what it then goes away and looks at, well, okay, what is the optimum type, size and mix of things that you could build? And all of a sudden it tells you, well, if you do that, your average sales value could be 250 quid a square foot. And what's the quickest, most efficient, optimum way of doing it? Well, actually now it's 140 quid a foot. And all of a sudden it's, well, like, shit, actually, maybe that could be made to work, yeah? But knowing that quickly, and knowing, you know, the art of being able to do that, i.e. come up with the scheme that's going to maximise land values, is really the art of property development, isn't it?
I think that's key. It's taken me certainly probably 15 years to hone that craft. You know, before it, like I said, it would take weeks to assess if a scheme is viable, or to even understand what the scheme was that could go on there. And over the years, you know, you can get that down to maybe 5-10 minutes now. We know if something is worth actually pursuing. Like you said, you need two key figures. And is there any scope, you know, is the sales rate enough for you to even continue looking at it, you know, to understand it and develop it further? Because far too many people spend, you know, days, weeks looking at a scheme and they haven't looked at the two key numbers. And, you know, you continue doing that, you're going to be a busy fool.
It goes back to the original point, doesn't it? You've got to know what you're doing. Software helps you. It's like the old A to Z analogy, isn't it? You know, and sat nav. If your sat nav goes down, you can still read a map. You've got to understand how you get to those numbers. and plugging them into the software just makes your life much, much easier and much, much quicker to do viability assessments, and it either works or it doesn't. But it's an interesting one because, I still get people going, well, it's £1 million an acre. They're going, it was never £1 million an acre 20 years ago. And it's like,
exactly.
it's just an industry where that terminology came from. It's like, but it's still bandied round. And
it's a bit like thirds.
there you go, yeah, exactly.
Now, there was a time, when thirds was the way to do it, and that was based on, well, that just sounds fair, but that was before there was any planning laws, and in the very, very, very olden days. But it's amazing that still gets bandied about.
And that's another, that's a pertinent issue. Actually, we discussed that before. There was an agent we saw not too long, last month, and they used the third and a third analogy. And you think, crikey, you can't still be using that. And the estate agents, again, are a key person in the sort of cogs of all this, in that they're misinforming a lot of landowners and giving them false valuations based on sometimes a finger in the air. That third and a third analogy just doesn't work now. You factor in the build cost, which is probably about 50% now, at least.
I think the other problem you've got is that a lot of agents factor in the end value post planning, even when you haven't got planning permission, and then they work the land value based on that. And obviously, that's just crazy. But then the landowner has got that figure in their mind, and it's very difficult unless you go through it. We're very transparent on how we get to our residual land values. So they can see, it's not a case of me trying to pull your pants down here and make a fast buck. We're trying to, we'll do joint ventures with people if it's necessary, to get a deal over the line as well. So it's not just a case of us going in as the developer and then taking the land off you in development and making the cash. We're happy to share profit if that makes the deal stack and make it work.
I think it goes back to that education point as well, doesn't it, with the landowner? Because you're absolutely right. We're transparent, and we find that helps. Because they can see, okay, crikey, you've got all these costs, consultant this, consultant that. Yes, there's a profit margin in there, but that's the reality. And taking them through that journey to understand how we've arrived at the figure. Listen, no, I've never gone into a first conversation and the landowner's happy with the figure. But I suppose that shows you're doing your job, right? That you've started at that notion. But transparency, we find, has helped us along the way. As much as possible, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, it is. So even when you're really experienced and you do know what you're doing, we've still got to deal with the biggest problem. I'm just going to talk about the biggest problems for me. Obviously, all the stuff that we know about planning, getting deals to stack, that's always been how it is. It is actually getting harder and harder and harder now as costs. The gap between end values and costs gets narrower and narrower and narrower. It is harder to get things to stack up. But, the issue always has been, or then becomes, dealing with landowners' unrealistic expectations. And then, of course, the problem, which are usually fueled, those unrealistic expectations, by agents that don't actually really know what they're talking about, as you've just mentioned, because, properly working out what you can get on a site and valuing it, it's hard enough even when you're experienced and you're knowing what you're doing. And there's no way an agent's going to know, right? So they come up with whatever they come up with, largely just to try to get a foot in the door to get themselves instructed, or some newish, so-called developer or trader that also doesn't know what they're doing, comes along, landowner says, I want £1 million or 10 million quid or whatever, and then they think that means that's what they've got to offer, and they yeah. But even though if it's it's unrealistic and it's never going to happen, I know that dealing with landowners' unrealistic expectations is something that we always need to do. And in actual fact, and the way to deal with that is as you mentioned, is about educating them. But you've got you've got to have the education and knowledge yourself in order to be able to do that, and then you've got to get that across to them in the right way without them thinking that you're just trying to have their pants down and steal their land, which is what they do tend to think.
Yeah, you get a lot, but it's what we find as well is that you'll get maybe the inexperienced developer or the very seasoned developer who does do that. They'll give them a headline figure, and then by attrition, they'll just chip them down. They'll get to a position whereby they'll get to the figure that they would have wanted originally, and the landowner's so fed up and pissed off by that time, they'll just give in and sell the deal, and then that becomes, they'll just say that they felt that they've lost out, right, or somebody's won and somebody's lost, and that's not a good position.
I'll tell you an interesting story, actually. I don't know, obviously I know, I've do training and stuff like that, and I have told this story on that before, but so I may not have told you. When I was like smallish developer for sort of like 10 years, slowly building up to bigger stuff, eventually got to the point where I realised how much I didn't know, decided I needed to go and get a job with a big developer to, learn properly, yeah? So anyway, targeted Lang Homes, because they were renowned for having the best training, luckily enough, got a job with Lang Homes. And also, luckily enough, my the land director there was fantastic land buyer, infamous within the industry, and so I basically had a really good mentor, learned a ton. He was excellent, right? And his name was Rob. I'm not going to give you his surname because he may or may not, if he ever hears this, want me to say. Anyway, let's call it Stevens, right? His name wasn't Stevens, right? But let's call him Rob Stevens, yeah? Anyone that's been in the house building industry for a long time will know who I'm on about, right? This was like, God, 25, 30 years ago. So he's retired. He does the odd little bit here and there. So he's sort of does a bit of development, but he's not really in the industry anymore. But people who've been around for a long time will know him, yeah? And God, I hope I'm going to end up saying his real name by accident in a minute. But anyway, let's call him Robert Stevens, right? So anyway, his talking about chipping, right? Yeah, i.e. doing people doing what you. So his whole model was he used to say just like, look, pull a contract, i.e. just make an offer, get a contract, get control of the site, yeah, and then start doing exactly what you said. When I first went there, so obviously I'm a new land buyer. I've never been a proper land buyer for a big developer, but I've been doing my own deals for 10 years, and I sort of knew how to do deals, and I was fairly good. So I said, look, Rob, I'm not doing that. I don't work that way. I'm not doing it. And he said, well, look, as long as you buy land, I don't fucking care what you do, really. So that was it. And I did buy land, so he didn't care. So that was his way of doing things. So basically, but in the industry, because remember, we were doing big deals, big sites with all of the West End agents and stuff like that. His reputation, he used to be called Chip Stevens. Yeah, everyone in the industry knew of Chip Stevens. Yeah, and so we might be bidding on some 10, 20 acre big hospital site, and Barclay. Interesting actually. When I was at Lang's, Barclay were my main competition. Yeah, because we were after all the same type of sites, yeah. But all of the big boys, Barrett's, Bellway, they're all after the same sites, yeah. And he'd pull a contract, yeah. He'd like find out, offer whatever he needed to offer to get a foot in the door and pull a contract. And all of the West End agents, everyone knew the bloke's name was Chip Stevens, but so he was always the highest offer. And it's but the landowners and the agents were like, where? But it's the best offer, and yeah, well, like maybe we won't get chipped this time. And his fucking name was Chip Stevens, and he chipped everything all the time. But my point about the story is everyone just gets so sucked in by the big number, they want to believe it. Of course they do. So actually playing it straight, look, it's worked for me, right? It's the way I've always done it. Is by not doing that.
Yeah, it's certainly something that's worked for us. Listen, it's taken us time to get to that strategy, but we've found transparency works well, because landowners that think you're trying to fleece them, it usually ends up in them walking away pretty soon.
I think the other thing is, we've discussed before as well, it's like when I would say 99% of the deals we do now are off market, direct to vendor, no competition.
That's the way it's got to be.
You're looking at stuff on Rightmove or Zoopla, you're looking in the wrong place.
Totally.
So when you're having those conversations with the landowners, and hopefully they haven't been made a stupid offer previously, but you've got a sensible starting point to build a relationship with people and take them on a journey, and hopefully get the planning permission, and you both walk away with a smile on your face.
Yeah. Well, actually, personally, one of the things I really like is as actually if and when someone has been messed around a lot, or ideally they've had a few planning refusals because someone's didn't know what they're doing, they've spun them a load of what's it, and it's not happened, then landowners have sort of learnt the hard way, is, oh, like, shit, it's not easy, and maybe that bloke was telling me the truth after all. So for me, a lot of stuff comes back. I'm never going to do a silly deal. I'll be totally straight with people. I explain how it works, and loads of stuff comes back to me.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. I think our last 2 or 3 deals have come back that way.
Yeah.
The biggest project that we're working on in Gloucester now, that was it off and on 3 times?
3 or 4.
I think it came back on the
3 or 4,
table for exactly that reason. You know, they were sold the dream. You know, it didn't go through. It was off, and then they come back a few months later. Well, exactly that. You know, there's no point buying the deals just for the sake of keep yourself busy. It's a dangerous game. So we're not always the most popular, is probably fair to say, at the start, but I think people appreciate transparency and honesty, and it may take a few months for the landowner to come round to understand that, but I think at the end, that usually tends to win through, I think.
Well, look, I think it's the only sensible way to do it. Like, as you know, I've sort of reverse engineered a bit of a system that tends to work, that has worked the most for me. And you know, the whole thing about landowners, it's like fact finding, relationship building, and also educating them. But in order to educate them, you actually need to know how it all really works yourself. And there's a lot of people that don't. What else you got there? Anyway, anything we missed? Anything interested in your notes?
I think we just wanted to round up on some positivity because we didn't want it to be don't bother getting out of bed.
No. Look.
Podcast, but
it is positive, and it can be positive. I mean, it's like a massively rewarding business. You know, if and when you eventually do get something tied up at the right price, and you get planning permission, and you know you build it. So go on then. Give me a bit positive?
I was just going to say that I think we've touched on it already. I think you need a great professional team. I cannot emphasise that enough. And we've alluded to a few of the people you need, but it's taken us time. You do have to kiss a few frogs along the way, but they're worth their weight in gold. You know, really good people that understand the industry, can understand what schemes you are likely to get planning on and what you're not, and not just mess around putting in something, it gets delayed, because ultimately it all comes back and it costs money. So I'd say a great team. I think a robust understanding yourself, and this is something that gets overlooked, of everything that's involved with development. I think you've said in the past that your architect's not going to lead your scheme, your planning consultant's not going to lead your scheme, your subcontractors certainly aren't going to do that. So I think if you are in control, you need to understand as much as possible every element of the development to give you half a chance. If you've got, you're relying on your architect or your planning consultant, not that they're bad and they're fantastic what they do, but the clue's in the name. They do architecture and planning.
100%. That's like, so I know, again, off air before we started, we were sort of like talking about, bullshit educators and gurus and people that don't know what they're on about, like trying to, sell people courses on property development, right? Yeah. And one of the things, and again, so this is all meant to be a bit educational for people. One of the term that drives me round the absolute bend is power team. Yeah, and it's like anyone in the real property development world knows how it really works. They wouldn't say, of course, we need a good team. We need to be. It's a collaborative thing. We need to work together. But there are people out there that try to infer when it comes to property development. There's some magical group of people like an architect and a planner that you just give it all to them and they do it all, and that couldn't be further from the truth 100%. When it comes to property development.
No, 100% agree. And you can get a painful lesson getting to that realization. And I think the sort of messages from probably throughout this whole podcast is, if you're going to step into the industry, do your due diligence, find the right educators. Go and visit a site, make sure they're actually building stuff. If they are actually building stuff, or they're if they're treating you to land and planning education course, what have they done? What have they delivered? What have they got through the system? how many years they've been in the business. It's all of that. It's not rocket science, but there seems to be a lot of people who've done a course for 12 months and then decide they're going to make their own course, and they start teaching people. They're one step in front of everybody else, and they all of a sudden they're the expert in the room.
Totally.
It is really scary, the amount of educators out there that they haven't got anything that they're actually doing in the space. They talk a good game, but it's right. Okay, show us your live projects. They haven't actually got anything going on. We've always, whoever in any walk of life, if they're doing exactly what you want them to do, they're the best educator. If someone has not done a property or something within that space for 20 years, but they talk a good game, they're not the person to follow. And we've seen a few of them, haven't we?
I mean, I know not everyone's on LinkedIn, but most people are. Certainly if you're sort of in business or you come from the sort of professional world. And it's like, well, look, just go and check them out. See what they've done. And we know people can maybe bullshit it a bit and all the rest of it. But, if they're very young and there's a load of gaps and it's all looking a bit, you've got to ask yourself, how much does this people, you wouldn't go to a bloody doctor, would you, if they qualified 6 months ago and I don't know, it seems like common sense to me.
There's a lot of red flags, and that's exactly one. You've got to ask whoever you go and see, education-wise, what projects are you currently doing? It comes back to this transparency point. And if they can't show anything that they're actively working on, are they the ones to be taking advice from? Probably not.
I think, I'm positive, right? We've got, over 1 million homes to build in the next 4 years?
Yeah,
let's get on it. Yeah, let's just go and get it done.
Well, I've got to tell you, absolutely. Just on the positive side, planning is still difficult. The system's massively under-resourced, as we know, but policy has changed big time. Grey Belt, in particular, absolutely is the opportunity of a generation. So if you were a new or newish developer, as long as you learn how to do it the right way and you listen to the right people, I mean, it is absolutely opportunity time of a lifetime, in terms of planning changes and as I say, particularly the Grey Belt.
I think you've got to make the most of the opportunity in the next 4 years, right? Before potentially legislation changes again with the next government, right? They could reverse that. So you're right. It's a massive, massive opportunity. Probably the biggest one in my lifetime.
Totally.
It's something we're looking at very closely, and as you alluded to, the complete flip-flopping of governments. Policies, it all ends up in uncertainty, which doesn't work well with developers. And I think there's it's not to be lost. There is a great opportunity in the next 4 years. It remains to be seen who comes in next, but there's definitely an easing, should we say? And I agree with what you're saying. Labour, there's a want, whereas before there previously wasn't. It was a closed shop, if you like. There's definitely a want to get things going, and there is things happening. I think the message we're trying to convey is that there just needs to be a bit more assistance, and probably an understanding on an SME level of what the true barriers are to unlock them. We've covered the majority of what we sort of wanted to cover, but I think one of the key ones that isn't often stuck to, shall we say, in the industry, is paying people on time and paying them fair rates. It's something that gets overlooked. It's something that's very close to me that I want to ensure that we do, and we have done to date. Hopefully we continue. But it's really important to pay good tradespeople on time and pay them fair rates. I don't particularly like the saying, but you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. And there's no truer saying with subcontractors. Again, we've kissed a few frogs along the way, but if there's a good one, pay them on time, if not early if you can, and pay them a fair rate, because it will pay dividends in the product you not only output, but for future projects. And it's a relationships business, as we all know.
Yeah, 100%. That reminds me actually of saying sort of around similar lines worth mentioning. I know you'll be interested in this as well. I went to some little talk earlier this week, and there was quite a few contractors there, like main contractors. It was just a sort of like breakfast networking thing, yeah. And everyone was both. It was developers and contractors, yeah, and everyone was talking about the fact that it's not easy out there, right? And one of the contractors was basically saying, he said if he priced stuff at what it really costs, he'd never get a job. So he's pricing it at what people tell him it needs to be, knowing full well that it's going to go up and they're going to make a load of claims and it's going to be a big... And I've got to tell you, he really pissed me off, actually. And it actually turned into a bit of a, not quite a row, but I basically said, look, doing that is just fulfilling the whole bullshit cycle of, like, you know, if a so-called developer or whatever, if you can't afford to do a deal because you can't build it for what you think you need to, well, it's not a deal, is it? Like, so by you, like, knowing that you can't build it for that, but then telling him you can, and knowing you're going to come back and hit him for more.
The reason I'm sitting here like a nodding dog is because I was at a charity event yesterday, and we're having exactly that conversation. They were saying if I priced it, you know, what I knew it would be, I'd never get any work. You know, so there's many people doing that. And it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it?
It is.
A lot of people are probably doing that. And they know there's going to be
and I'll tell you what
variations
happened. Tell them, yeah, we can do it for 200 quid a foot, whatever, you know. And then the developer, or so-called developer, now I wouldn't call him a developer because he's not very clever if he can't work out what it really should be, and he's just wanting people to tell him what he wants to hear. You know, he's then down the pub telling people, yeah, well, I'm doing it for 200 quid a foot. And then everyone thinks, oh, it can be done for 200 quid a foot. But it fucking can't, you know?
No, those days are gone. Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think one of the things which is quite important for me is continuing professional development in the industry. People need to keep up to speed with legislation changes, keep up to speed with industry changes, and you know, and just keep on learning. You know, I'm 55 this year, and I'm still learning every day.
Well, trying to end positive, but it hasn't really worked, has it?
We try to offer
What
some
can we do?
hope. But there's definitely hope and solutions out there. It's about working with governments, working with media outlets like this to educate and say that there is hope. But these are the barriers. What are the solutions? And trying to, I think education's a key one, because there is a negative narrative, I think it's fair to say, against developers in various outlets, whether it's right or wrong. Obviously, we're biased. But it's working with people, I find, and not against. It helps.
Well, look, there are good ones. Hopefully we here are all good ones. And we're trying to create more good ones, you know, because at the end of the day, everyone knows there's a massive need for housing. We all want good housing. We need more people like us creating it, don't we? Because the big house builders can't do it on their own.
Couldn't agree more.
Thanks for tuning in to Inside Property Development. Please remember to like and subscribe. Do join us every week where we'll be speaking to house builders, developers, experts, planners, and everyone involved in trying to get more much needed housing created the right way. We'll learn together how we can collaborate rather than fight, and by working together we can all help create better places, spaces and homes and a much more beautiful world.